with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin. So, Rich, we are coming down to the wire. A very, very important election. I don't even know why it's close, really. And, obviously it's an off year, and, the president's party usually doesn't do well, 2 years after being elected. But look at his headline. I mean, are we going to turn this back? Small business optimism surges to highest level ever. I'm talking ever, topping previous record under President Reagan. I mean, you have to go back a long time ago. I mean, we're talking ever. And it only rivaled under President Reagan, but still beating out his incredible run as president. What do you think about that?
Well, I just find that we live in la la land. I mean, you look at it's really frustrating, and yet you hear about people out there saying, "Well, we got to elect Gillum, we got to elect Democrats, we got to take back the House, we have to impeach him. Impeach him for what? I don't know, but we have to impeach him." So it's frustrating, the heck out of me when you think about the whole thing. That's how I feel about it.
Major disconnect, and we're gonna have a lot of discussions today about jobs and the economy and getting our country back to work. I guess under Obama we used to always talk about getting our country back to work. Now our country is back to work.
No, we used to add up the number of jobs we lost on a weekly basis. I did that report. It was astounding that you could do that. You don't do that anymore.
Hey, but we have a great friend of the show on. And I think this is the hardest working guy in cable news, on television, on radio. He
doesn't sleep.
A very, very fascinating man. But he's also a great author. He's got a number of books out. And his current book, Andrew Jackson and the Miracle of New Orleans, currently is at number 5. Just came out, number 5 in the New York Times paperback list. I mean, that's an incredible accomplishment. We're very pleased to have back with us, great friend of the show, Brian Kilmeade, Fox News television personality, host on Fox News Radio, Kilmeade and Friends, great author, and a great friend of ours. Brian, welcome to Made in America.
Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
So tell us, back during the Miracle of New Orleans, the Battle of New Orleans, Americans were fighting together. We were fighting against a foreign invader. Now we just seem to fight against ourselves. What is the lesson to be learned from Andrew Jackson and the Miracle of New Orleans today?
Well, I mean, the actual army itself shows coming together. I mean, it had 3 men of color, Cajuns, pirates, Tennesseans, Kentuckians, who were riflemen, sharpshooters, and, of course, regular militia. But, I mean, at the time, and one of my points is people should keep whatever we're going through now in perspective, because at the time, the northern states didn't want to participate in the war. They had a Hartford Convention where the states were going to get together, and they were heading to Madison, and they were saying, listen, we're out of here. We're not fighting, and we kind of want to form our own thing. We want to reestablish relations with Britain. So when you talk about a country who has its capitals burned to the ground, no standing army, losing almost every battle, most of what there are is an organized army is up in Canada trying to win a battle they thought would be easy, and it wasn't. And then you have England defeat France, and instead of looking for a peace treaty with us, they drag it out, and then they try to finish us off. And it was Jackson they had to call on in 1814 to get involved, even though he tried to get involved right away and begged to be called on with his militia and was dying to fight. And they said, no, we got this handled. When it was clear they didn't have it handled and Jackson had to come in, he had to reel off a series of victories. But still, Washington was burned, the White House was destroyed, and the country was fractured. So we came through all that. And then the Battle of New Orleans, it was the second biggest day in American history up until the Civil War. It was celebrated as almost a national holiday. So this war, this battle, this victory was so unthinkable, unfathomable, that people look at it as a miracle. And yes, Jackson says, I give full credit to the the prayers of the Ursuline nuns, for the British to land where they landed, which was dumb, for them to be able to have 3 weeks to dig a ditch, fill it with water, and build a berm to block them from New Orleans, for him to be able to get an army from 1,200 to 5,000 in 3 weeks, and then wipe out an army of 9,000 in 45 minutes. He thinks that was a divine intervention.
Well, and it was
sounds like it.
It was absolutely amazing. You know, what I find about the history of Jackson is the ferociousness of Jackson. I mean, when you think of the Revolutionary War and you think of the father of the country, George Washington, someone you did write about, and the remarkable job he did keeping that army together and winning the war. I mean, taking on the most powerful navy and army in the world, and he won. And then you look at Jackson, and you look at the ferociousness of the battles that he went into, and how he amalgamated all those people, Brian, like a Talladega, 300 enemy get killed, 15 of his guys get killed. Keeps it all together. You know, what was it had to be such a remarkably strong-willed individual in Andrew Jackson.
And he went on to become president. Yeah. He goes on to be president.
Just an amazing guy.
The founder of the Democrat Party. You know, when the Democrats get together every year, they have the Jackson dinner, right? That's where they all celebrate each other. And now they want to turn their backs on him, right? They want to rename. They want to rename their founder. It's amazing. It's such a historic American who made such a huge difference. And you know
But what is that
major party in the United States,
Brian,
wants to disown him.
How did this man make this thing happen? What energy did he have inside himself to reach out and have all these victories?
Well, I mean, he was driven. I mean, he was extremely patriotic. He was also suffering from dysentery. He had just gotten a duel with a guy he would eventually be friends with, who shot him in the shoulder. He almost died. He had a bullet in him. So he was had a bullet in him. He had dysentery. He had all types of illnesses. He was 6'1", down to 140 pounds. And he had to ride on his horse by himself over this future battlefield and decide how to fight it. Then you say to yourself, well, you know, just tap into your experience. Not really. He wasn't West Point trained. He basically trained. He went on all instinct. He led on all instinct. He didn't take any leadership courses. He didn't have a parent as a role model. He was an orphan by the time he was 14 years old. So this guy is just a true American success story. Even if you don't agree with everything he did, well, most of what he did, it's up to you. But what I did is I included what other presidents thought of him. Reagan loved him, Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, Harry Truman, and Lincoln. So Republicans and Democrats all liked him. So they want to rename the dinner and they want to defile his grave and take down a statue. Mm-hmm. Well, you're really messing with history.
Jacksonville, Florida, you know, named after Jackson, Mississippi. You know, what do? You rename every place because, you know, there's some things he did you didn't like, but, you know, it was a different world. It was a different context. I don't know. Just our, you know, the craziness of our culture these days. But, hey, Brian, you know, talking about an election and Democrats and Republicans, we have an election coming up. Any predictions on the House? Any predictions on the Senate?
I think they're going to pick up about 4 seats in the Senate. President's going to try to lock that in. I have no idea on 435 races, though. So, and I don't think anybody else has really said it for sure. Where with the, you know, with their what they think is going to happen. I would say this: my fear is there's going to be some doubt. My fear is it's going to be out in California, and they're going to be casting absentee ballots, and there'll be more problems with an election. I just want some type of clarity. Any type of wave talk, I think, is farcical. But I think the good thing about the country is that we're all showing up. Evidently, the early voting is in proportion with our population as strong as it's been since 1914, which I think is fantastic, don't you?
Yeah, I do. As a matter of fact, I voted last weekend because I figured it was going to be crazy during the week and it would be very difficult to do it. And it was pretty crowded when I was there. So I'm hoping, and from what I'm hearing, that we're getting a pretty good Republican turnout in the pre-election.
I think it's going to be good Republican and Democrat. They say if it's way high, it's good for the Democrats, and it's way low, it's good for Democrats. I'm not sure about that. They say if it's in between, the Democrats will panic. So anybody who thinks the Republicans are going to stay home are crazy. The other thing is anybody who thinks the polls are accurate are nuts for a very good reason. Most Trump supporters don't tell him because especially if they're in purple areas, they don't need it. You know, if they're at work, they're not going to talk about it, and if they're at home, they're not going to talk about it. So if a pollster calls you up or contacts you or comes up to you with a clipboard, are you going to tell them? Really? Some stranger? You're going to be used against me? So we're seeing what's going on right now. So to me, the polls really cast a lot of doubt on everything, which makes it more interesting on Tuesday.
Yeah, it does, and I would love to see them totally mess it up again. I mean, they forgot they messed up 2 years ago, and nobody's talking about that anymore. So now they're all perfect again. Hey, Brian, thanks for being on the show. It's been wonderful to have you. Great book, Andrew Jackson and the Miracle of New Orleans, currently number 5 in the New York Times paperback list by the great Brian Kilmeade, radio host and cable news personality extraordinaire. Brian, thanks for being on the show.
No problem, Neil. And if anybody wants it personalized and I'm not coming to your town, just go to briankilmeade.com. It'll go to my local bookstore, and I can do it and send it out. So much, guys.
That's wonderful. Thank you for bringing that up. Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I have plenty of things to talk about here, and they all have to do with your jobs.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin. Hey, Rich, Brian's such a great guy. He's been with us a number of times, works really, really hard. He's in a hot seat. That's a hot seat, being there every morning. I mean, that's a tough show. I've been on his show a number of times.
Trump likes him.
Yeah.
He's interviewed Trump.
And the left hates him. I mean, so, I guess you're putting yourself out there.
Understandable, I guess. You know what I mean? You know what's interesting about Brian? Brian personally has had, confrontations on the Long Island Railroad as he was trying to get home one day. He's a really interesting guy. And you're right. This guy never stops working. He's out there. I applaud his success.
Yeah. It's excellent. Hey, something I got to bring up, as a newsflash, and I've been kind of waiting for this. I mean, we talk a lot about trade and how trade is very important. And both President Trump and President Xi from China have issued statements that, hey, look, I think we might be able to work this whole trade thing out. And, I've been waiting for that, as an American manufacturer and as an American importer of components and parts for our factories, and just a stable world order for trade. America and China, the two largest economies of the world, we got to get along. Now, hopefully, President Trump has brought China to the table with real policy proposals that will change things, because it can't just be, okay, wink, wink, some of the things on the surface. I mean, with the new deal with Mexico and Canada, did we really, really fundamentally change things? It was working pretty well. Yes, we kind of updated it, but nothing was really fundamentally changed. We're not calling it NAFTA anymore. I guess that's the biggest change, right? The U.S., Mexico, Canada,
well, that's a bad
trade
word.
agreement.
It's not like.
Yeah, the connotation of that,
no.
as I get it. So, I mean, maybe that was the biggest change. But at least our continent are together, we're unified, we're working together, and so forth. President Trump was very smart, because he said if you do any deals with non-market economies, Canada and Mexico, we could just pull out of this whole thing. And that was that he was telegraphing, if you did anything with China, a non-market economy, our deal's off the table. So he's basically saying, North America, China, you're not a friend of North America unless you change your economy and become a market economy, right? You must be a market economy. Very smart. I didn't see that coming, but when it did, I says, wow, that was very good. That was very good. Very smart.
Well, it's the art of the
clever
deal, isn't it?
That's right. So now we get into China. They have to make fundamental changes. See, and with Mexico and Canada, it was kind of on the surface stuff. But this has to be fundamental. This has to be fundamental. I mean, the way that they've done business and got away with so much for so long has to change. So I'm very, very excited to see, are we turning a new page in global trade, which will truly benefit the United States, and American entrepreneurs can make us proud everywhere in the world, including China, because of our prowess, our expertise, because of our work ethic, and now we have a shot at China believe me, the American entrepreneur will make us all proud.
Well, I think it's just terrific. And listen, if you look at the global picture and understand, I think the Trump administration has done a really interesting job, Neil. I mean, look, he's manipulated and leveraged Mexico and Canada. He's forged a deal when everyone said, "Oh, it's going to go nowhere, and bad's going to happen, and Mexico's going to hate us forever, and Canada hates us, and they'll start speaking French." The whole thing. But he aligned that. He put that together. What is possible is that he could also forge an alliance and a good deal in Europe. Now, what we don't know is what he has been doing in that arena in Europe. But we do know that China is looking at this, and it looks like he's positioning the United States with as much leverage as possible on the global scale that would at some point force China to make the changes that you're talking about. And that would be amazing.
What he's saying, he's putting on notice with the Mexico-Canada deal that if you sign a trade agreement with the United States and you have the UK that wants to do a deal.
That's right.
Europe, who's very nervous about 25% duties on their automobiles coming into the United States. So now they're at the table. They're saying, oh, my goodness, this guy is crazy. We'd better make some kind of deal. So they're saying, okay, well, let's just open up both of our markets and just get rid of all this stuff. But what Trump's going to put in there, he's going to put in the poison pill that if you do a deal with China, you don't have a deal with the United States. Unless China, if you change and become a market economy.
And we sign off on it. I mean, by our definition. Well, that's a brilliant power play, don't you think?
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And, hey, look, I mean, if I was China, I would be saying, hey, wait a second. This guy's came up with something that's, okay, if we want to poke the eye in the United States, in the eye of the tiger, okay, we'll take our risk with the U.S. market. But no, what President Trump is saying, anybody who trades with the United States and want a trade agreement with the United States, you need to agree that you only do trade deals with market economies. So China's got to be, just for that reason, China has to come to the table and say, look, game up. We have more to lose than we have to win. We should have been, we should have had to deal with this before. How many years have we got away with it? Now let's live in a world to where we can all trade fairly. Now they will work around the perimeters and they'll work all kinds of special little things for themselves, but it can't be so blatant and obvious that they're stealing and they're preventing Americans from being successful.
And a final note, remember one thing, they may be communists, but they're amazing capitalists in a communist society. They're sharp businessmen. They know that.
Oh, these guys are good.
They know that.
These guys are sharp.
That's right.
Hey, look, we got a great guest coming up, Mark Hamrick, Senior Economic Analyst at Bankrate.com. Just going to talk about it overall and what would happen if China and the United States make a trade deal. You don't want to miss this.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neil Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Hey, Rich, we just talked a moment ago about President Trump and President Xi of China. They're telegraphing some, hey, look, maybe we're going to get this trade thing fixed up here. It was a headline just recently at Newsmax that they got a big meeting coming up in the end of November, and they're starting to say maybe we could resolve our differences.
Well, there were positive signs.
Yeah, so that's
President Xi said that,
and that's great. And let me tell you, as an American manufacturer, our supply chain heavily depends on Chinese components to go into our manufactured products in the United States. So this tariff thing is not just about, finished goods. This is also a lot about things that go into American manufacturing. Okay. If they solve this, I got to tell you, the boom is going to be amazing. It's going to be absolutely amazing. I think everybody's just holding their breath, hoping that some resolution is going to happen. And already we see the jobs market right now just so incredible. I mean, the unemployment rate is essentially anybody who wants a job has a job. Anyone who has a pulse rate has a job.
And those who have a job can get another job.
Yes.
I mean, they're quitting at record numbers to move to get another job. They weren't doing that 8 years ago.
That's right.
This is exciting. I want to hear this.
They weren't doing it.
Oh, we are
going to
hear this. That's right. We do it. That's good.
We have joining us right now Mark Hamrick, who's the senior economic analyst at bankrate.com, and we are going to talk about jobs. Mark, welcome to Made in America.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So there's a lot of, great stuff out there. And, this trade thing, I mean, if we can resolve that, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure off the market. I think this uncertainty, this cloud is just going to make another huge explosion in people investing, building things, buying things, me as a manufacturer saying, okay, at least I know what the landscape is. Let's go, let's get at it. So tell us, I mean, how important do you think a trade agreement is to the jobs numbers? And if a trade agreement did happen between the U.S. and China, what would that mean for jobs in our country?
Sure. No, I think that is certainly one of the looming questions of the day. It's a great question to ask. Of course, we don't know what the agreement looks like, right? So that's number one. But assuming
we know President Trump will declare it a victory, though.
Well,
and I think that sometimes perception is all about reality, right? If you perceive something, it becomes reality.
Well, but you need the reality to actually, make progress in this iteration, and so that has been one of the would-be letdowns from the perception of the agreement that involves the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, is that many people felt as if this was basically pretty close to the status quo and also unresolving the issues with steel and aluminum. So I don't want to proclaim the benefits of an agreement which has yet to be announced and has yet to be defined. But in terms of the broader concept of hoping that it is resolved, absolutely. But I would also say that this is not the only input when it comes to things which can cause uncertainty. And as we speak, the midterm election is precariously on our doorstep. And unfortunately, for anyone who might be a bit weary about thinking or discussing politics, the midterms will only be the resolution of those races, as this 2020 election is basically going to take all the air out of the room immediately thereafter. So I think that uncertainty, unfortunately, in our modern world, leaving the personalities aside, there are plenty of dynamics and variables in play where financial markets are going to have to work through other things, because, as you note, resolution of the U.S.-China trade dispute, if it were to occur, could, in fact, unleash more beneficial business activity in the United States. And so what is one of the major concerns in financial markets been recently? Rising interest rates. And we've been seeing some damage, I would say, from that, or at least unintended consequences of rising interest rates, causing some real disruption in the housing market, which, combined with two tax law changes over the past year, may be causing the housing market to cool off more aggressively than many of us had expected by now.
And that's a very, very good point, because there are a lot of people concerned right now with sort of like the echoes of what happened in 2006. You're right. The housing market, looking out and currently, is kind of flattening out just a little bit right now. And yes, I think you raised a very, very good point, and that's interest rates, the Fed's raising interest rates versus, by the way, the president saying, he's getting out there making his comments about the interest rates. And I think there's some validity to that. Do you think? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that there's a reason why we have a politically independent central bank in this country, because history has shown that those which are independent politically effectively do their jobs, quote unquote, better. And what that means is you're obviously trying to manage the performance of the economy through sort of either gearing up or gearing down through monetary policy. And so I don't think the president's, what I would say, are short-term political interests necessarily align with the mandate of our central bank. I think ultimately we all sort of want the same things. I think Jerome Powell wants to keep economic growth maintained at a sustainable rate without causing inflation overheating. also without causing, obviously, an economic disaster that would be essentially a recession or worse. But he also wants to see sustainable employment, and I think ultimately that's what the president should want. I get that the president is sensitive to the downtrends that we've seen lately in stock prices, which then have bounced back somewhat. But, I think that most presidents in modern times have observed that, number one, probably best not to jawbone the Fed, and number two, their long-term interests are the same as I think for just about everybody else in the country. Can they make mistakes? Sure, they have over time. But, the president might be better off focusing on some of his other economic priorities rather than trying to make a punching bag out of, by the way, the Fed chair that he nominated.
Good point. Good point, Mark. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We're glad you came with us. I mean, interest rates, sort of that voodoo magic. I mean, how to suggest and predict and what they should be. I mean, I guess there will never, ever be any agreement on that. It'll just happen. It just seems to happen.
It's always fodder for discussion, that is for sure.
That's right. Hey, Mark, thanks for being with us. Mark Hamrick-Senior, economic analyst at bankrate.com, and some great thoughts on jobs and interest rates. Looking forward to have you back soon, Mark. Coming up, we have Jim Kennedy from the Kennedy Institute for Public Policy Research going to talk about a couple of very important gubernatorial races. You don't want to miss this. It has a big impact on jobs.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin. Hey, Rich, we got a couple of gubernatorial races. I mean, we got a lot of them, but, a couple of them are really standouts. And the one in Florida in particular is a real standout. A very pro-business, very entrepreneurial, very small business-friendly state. Just a great state to run a business and to want to have a business and to raise a family and, to enjoy the weather. I mean, so many great things.
And evidently people come here to retire for a lot of good reasons.
Like taxes.
That's right.
Lack thereof.
That's exactly right.
So how could a socialist, a really deep blue sort of socialist type of a guy who might work okay up in New England or the great state of California, how could that happen in Florida? Will that happen in Florida? We're very pleased to bring on Jim Kennedy from the Kennedy Institute for Public Policy Research. Hey, Jim, I know you have some very strong opinions on this, but how in the world could Florida elect a socialist? It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I just don't see a state that is as red and or purplish, maybe how you want to look at it, as Florida going that far to the left. For someone like Gillum, who really, he's a socialist. I don't know how you want to label it, democratic, socialist, whatever. I mean, he's got Bernie Sanders out there trumping for him. He's got President Obama out there stumping for him, and Joe Biden. And this is a guy with his policies about wanting to raise corporate income taxes, wanting to get rid of ICE, open borders, is really a very blue, deep blue guy in a purple state. And I don't know, there's lots of things you can look at it. Is it simply that it really is Republicans that just aren't, fessing up to want to vote against him that are the issue? Now, remember, 42% as of Wednesday of the state has already voted, 42% of the incoming absentee ballots are Republican, which is up from the 2016 general election, and 26% of the state has already voted. So for those ads that are running now, those guys aren't really getting much coverage because those votes have already been cast. So maybe it's people that just aren't fessing up to voting for him, or maybe the
is this FBI thing resonating around the country? I mean, you're out in California. Is the FBI thing, Rich? What do you think about that? The FBI investigation.
I do not hear a lot about that because the media itself, which is basically controlled by the left, doesn't want to cover it.
I mean, the guy was on a take. They're investigating corruption.
He's corrupt. He's a corrupt guy,
and he's taking all these sorts of things, tickets and Broadway shows.
He's a bad guy.
And
let's just be clear on that.
So, Jim, what's up with that?
No, and unfortunately, because he's made the narrative. If you question me about any of those investigations, you're a racist, which is not an answer to the question.
But that's getting boring already. Come on.
But that's exactly where he's taking this election. It's exactly where he's taking it. When DeSantis brought it up in a debate, he says, yes, but that's not one of the things that we're talking about. I mean, he puts it aside like everything Obama came up with, or we came up with about Obama back in, when he was running. He said, oh, this is just a distraction. And the media went along with it. So in this case, we're seeing the same thing to a degree.
No, absolutely, you're right. He is basically doing a pretty good job of deflecting everything. You are, from what you asked earlier, it is not gaining any traction. People just aren't buying into it. Or you could say that voters are just tired of corruption in general. They don't really believe it because there's so much fake news out there. They don't know what really is corruption and what is fake corruption. So they're just kind of basically playing it off both sides and going to what, let's just take this off the board and take a look at what I'm looking for in a candidate. And I don't really know how Gilliam has that in Florida, but he's up by a couple of points in just about every poll so far.
Yeah, within a margin of error. Hey, real quick, prediction in Florida, and very quickly tell us what's going on in Georgia.
Wow, Gilliam probably by a couple of points, unfortunately, unless there's a big swing in the absentee ballots that are indicating Republican lower turnout in the polling places and more turnout absentee. Florida, or the Georgia, Stacey Abrams has got Oprah Winfrey out trumping for her now. So I can't see Georgia turning blue. It's got to still be a red state by a couple of points.
Okay, so we still got a little bit of time, and there's another race in Florida that I'd like to get your thoughts on, and that's Rick Scott and Bill Nelson. I mean, this looks like it could be a couple of points Rick Scott.
Yeah, no, that's a very tight race. Both of them are within the margin of error, and Rick Scott is getting pretty decent marks for his hurricane relief, and that's helping him a little bit. But Bill Nelson is an institution down there. It's been around forever. Might be time for him to retire away. But if Florida is turning more blue with the Gilliam backing, then Bill Nelson is in a good seat. But right now, both of those races are as we're talking about, we'd call them toss-ups right now.
Well, what's interesting in the Bill Nelson thing, because I kind of pay attention to that one, because I don't particularly care for the guy. I never liked him when he was a senator from the state of Florida when the space program was being dismantled by the Obama administration, and the state of Florida took a direct hit as a result of the shuttle program going down and NASA going down for quite a while. And Nelson did nothing to protect this state. He didn't fight to save it. And people are wondering, hey, the guy's been there for 22 years. What has he really accomplished? And I got to tell you, it's very hard to find a litany of ideas that he did.
Yeah,
you got a free ride. You got a free ride in the space shuttle.
Yeah, no, exactly. He was an astronaut. He was on one of the space shuttles. He's representing the state. And then what happens? They sell off the shuttles. They gave them away to everybody. Wow. Yeah, but Jim, what's worrying me, a lot of Democrats are saying the bison can vote. I mean, they're out there saying they're registering the bison. It's very concerning to me.
I'm sure the Democrats will register anything that can fog a mirror to try to win this election. Trust me.
Yeah, the bison, the night crawlers, I don't know. I mean,
the elk.
Yeah. Careful, I think some of those are dog whistles, according to Don Lemon.
Hey, Jim, thanks for being on the show.
You're welcome. I appreciate it.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to have some final thoughts on this very, very, very adventurous, fun show, which, by the way, I learned a lot. I hope you did, too. You don't want to miss what's coming up.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Hey, Rich, very, very nice to have Jim Kennedy from the Kennedy Institute for Public Policy Research on. Very, very smart guy. He's looking at a lot of these races. I mean, it's right. There's just so many toss-ups, and what we didn't talk about just a moment ago. And this, what does this mean? I don't know, but it's a headline this week that could have a huge impact. Black approval rating of Trump hits historic high. I mean,
that's significant.
That's significant. I mean, because 1 or 2% of the African American vote. I mean, what would that do in some of these close races?
It worked against Hillary. Remember, Trump had a larger black turnout than they anticipated. He had a larger Hispanic turnout than was anticipated. It hurt Hillary. the fact that we have such good numbers coming out in the black community, the African American community, and a good proportion of them are motivated to vote, that can be very, very interesting. And that alone could also help swing it back to the Republican side with all this blue wave momentum that they're alleging that's out there, which I don't believe.
There's not going to be a wave. I think there's going to be pockets of, we won here, you won there, we won here, we won there. But, a state that was just kind of off the map, and it was kind of like, oh, this is a Democrat state, you bring up the Latinos. By the way, Latino employment numbers is like the best they've ever been.
Through the roof.
Like, through the roof.
Yep. Like,
historic. And you get a state like New Mexico, which has a very, very large Latino population and obviously a big part of the electorate. And now those races are very, very competitive.
Well,
Which were, foregone conclusions that they were Democrat office holders, and now that may not be the case. You got John Tester, who's up in Montana, we just talked about him a moment ago.
Not a good guy. He's a good guy.
But he's, an incumbent, been around for a long time, and he's in for the race of his life. So you're seeing in some of these places that you would not expect during a blue wave year, the blue wave, and the off year in congressional elections, typically the party that doesn't win a White House does very well. I mean, so the Democrats are supposed to do very well. But no, you're seeing in places like McCaskill in Missouri. I mean, she's on the ropes.
Well, she made some mistakes.
She's on the ropes, and she's won twice, and she's on the ropes. She's on the ropes. Donnelly in Indiana, he's on the ropes. And looks like Joe Manchin, he looks like he's played West Virginia very well. I think President Trump won West Virginia by like 40%.
That's right. So Manchin had no choice in his vote for Kavanaugh.
Yeah, but what a wimp, because he waits for Senator Collins
to see where the wind was blowing,
to see that he had it, and then he announces like 3 minutes later, "Oh, I'm for Kavanaugh." Yeah. I mean, what a wimp. I mean, the people of West Virginia, come on, don't be fooled by that. That's like so stupid. Don't let him off the hook for that.
But the bottom line is this. What I find interesting about the Trump rallies and his tweeting and so forth, and he gets in your face. He gets in everyone's face. It's really amazing. Maxine Waters says, if you see them in a restaurant, you get up to them. You tell them you're not wanted. But in a way, he gets in front of everyone's face by tweeting all the time and doing these amazing rallies that has 50, 60, 70,000 people. But he really defines the difference between the Republican vision, his vision, and the Democratic vision. He makes it really clear. Democrats are mobs, Republicans are jobs. That's an easy thing to remember. He does do that. And I think that's a very important motivating factor. To the one thing, Neil, we must tell everybody out there, you must vote. You must vote. This is not a sit-home election. You must vote, and you take every person you know that's friendly, and you get them out there, and they vote. You cannot sit this one out.
Yeah, and the numbers are looking very encouraging. Hey, whatever happens, Americans are much more engaged politically than they've been in a long, long time. You look at this early polling number, the early voting numbers. It's absolutely amazing. You're seeing all these historic numbers.
They're as motivated now as they were in 2016. It's coming together.
And and what does it mean? We don't know. It's going to be a very fascinating night next Tuesday. It's going to be fascinating. It is going to be fascinating. No party is going to come away saying we knocked it out of the park. I mean, it's going to be very fascinating to see how some of these areas where you would expect it to go Democrat, it's going to go Republican. In some areas where expected to be Republican, it's going to go Democrat. And then the chips are going to fall where they may. However, wherever these chips fall have a huge, huge impact on your jobs, right? So do you want to go with the Socialist Party of America? Who wants to regulate and take away the resources from the most productive part of our society, our small businesses and entrepreneurs? Or do you want to unleash the amazing power of American entrepreneurialism? That's what you're going to be voting for. Remember that. Rich.
You're going to say it. You're going to say it.
I could have went on, and I wish I had more time. But unfortunately, we're out of time. But we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.